So welcome to deep dive into Google Forms. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I have several ideas, tips, tricks, whatever you want to call them, for different ways that you can use Google Forms. So by this point, you've probably been able to use Google Forms, maybe just to gather information. Maybe it was for an assessment, but we're going to look at some of the settings, things like that, to help you through. So I just have a Google form here that I use for my training. So it's got some examples of different things. So I would suggest for you guys, if you would have a Google form open, I would just create a blank one. With some of these settings, you might want to not be in one that you already have, just so you can see things. And I'm going to show you some tips so we can get some questions in there and so forth. So one of the things that we are going to look at is working with some of the settings that we have. So the settings are per form. So they're per form that you create. However, there is something called preferences that affect all of your Google forms. So, and when I say that, when we set our preferences, this is only going to take effect for the forms that you create after today. But any previous, it will not affect them. You would have to change the settings individually. So I'll show you what that means. And for this example, I am just going to, we'll do it on here. So I'm going to look at my preferences. So I'm not going to my little gear that we're so used to going. We're going to go to the three little dots. So when I go to those three little dots, I have something that's called preferences. So when I click on preferences, this takes me into a screen. And again, I don't know why they call it preferences in one area and now they call it the default settings. So think of preferences as the settings for all of your documents. So what's going to affect each of them. So, and it says right here, it's going to only affect those that are created in the future. So collecting emails. That is a good one, especially if you're using it for assessments. If you're using it with your students that are on Chromebooks, then you know who is taking the assessment. It is collecting their email address. If, for example, I have mine turned off just because I do a lot for training, so I don't always want an email address collected. But for you guys using it with your students, you probably always want to do that. Unless there's that one case where you might want to do an anonymous survey. And then in that individual one, then you can change it for just that individual form. These are the important ones down here, especially as more and more people are using forms for assessments. Make sure that you have these settings applied. So these include make the questions required. So when I make the questions required, that means that it's automatically going to flag that question. The toggle is going to be turned on for required. Now, do you have a question, maybe a comments area, maybe suggestions that you don't want required? That's fine. Each individual question you can change on your own. Then the other one is the default point value. So default point value is defaulted to 0. Well, when we take tests and we take quizzes, we typically don't grade with 0 points. We usually have 1 point associated with multiple choice questions. Now, what happens if you have an extended response, or maybe you're having the students put their first and last name? Those questions you can go in individually and change them to 0. Then once this is saved, this applies to all future assessments forms that you create. So what did that just do? So that changed what is in my gear for all of my forms. So when I click on this, okay, you will see from any form that you create from now, you will see if you selected collect email address, this would be checked or not checked, depending on how you had that. Okay. The other thing that it would do is require all those questions. Those things are not going to be seen here, but they are going to be seen with the question. So for example, in this one, the toggle would be turned on if I required it for all of my questions. Okay. Again, it applies to quizzes or forms that you create in the future. This one I already had created, so that's why those preferences didn't take effect. The other thing that it would do is in my answer key, it would default the point value to 1 instead of 0. So as I would go through them, they would all be set to 1 unless I go in to manually change them. Okay. So those are the things that the preferences or the default settings has done. Let's look at our settings in general. Okay. Collecting email addresses. And these two right here. Restrict the user to, in my case, TCCSA, it's going to say your domain here. If you do that, nobody outside of your domain can answer. Okay. And you're like, well, no, I want parents to be able to answer and so forth. Then this has to be off. You'll notice that as soon as I uncheck this, okay, it's still collecting email addresses. So what does that mean? Now it doesn't collect them manually, or I'm sorry, it doesn't collect them automatically. It has to be typed in manually. Okay. It only knows to collect the email address if it comes from your domain. Okay. For example, your students probably don't know that you're collecting their email addresses. There is a little box that says this form is collecting the email address, but half the time the students don't look at that. Even with manual entry for email addresses, if you limit them to one response, if that Gmail address is used more than one time, it will say you've already answered this form. Okay. And notice I said it has to be a Google account. Okay. So, but in this case, it could be outside of the domain, but it has to be a Google account. I will give you guys some good news. Okay. And I hope to see something in the chat for this one. Google Forms is going to release that it is going to save the students' work as they go. So it will be saved and they can return the next day if they do not finish a form during your class period. So it's not all done. They have to finalize and submit. If they only get to question 5, they can return the next day and continue with the remaining questions. So hopefully right now it is in beta. Yay. See, I am getting some yays. It is in beta right now. It is kind of nice. I have it on our TCCSA domain. It's kind of strange going back and seeing that, but it is going to be a nice feature for the classroom teachers. Hopefully it will be released to everyone by the fall when we start school, but I do not have a release date yet. Okay, and then a few other things here. The edit after submit, with the ability for the students to be able to go back in shortly and to be able to do this. I'm not sure that this is going to be a necessary feature because they'll be able to go in, they'll be able to see their answers and so forth. So this is a little tricky because when this is on, they can't go back 5 days later and start changing. They can go back after they've submit and re-enter it. So it's a little bit different. So we'll see if that sticks around once the ability to save as you go, once that's released to everyone. Let's look at our presentation. You guys are seeing this screen, right? Are you guys seeing my settings screen? I'm hoping. Can somebody give me? Okay, perfect. Because my screen sharing just flashed to yellow for a second. So I wanted to make sure you guys were seeing this. The progress bar. So at first I didn't like this. I'm like, okay, what's the point of this? Well, now that more and more teachers are using this for an assessment, we are not necessarily putting all of our questions in a big, long stream. We are using sections, maybe one question per section. Maybe we have a couple reading passages. So we have a reading passage with 2 or 3 questions. Then the next section has a new reading passage with questions and so forth. This show status bar allows the kids to see how much they've completed until completion. So if there's 5 sections, it's going to say 1 of 5 as they're going through the different sections. So now it's a little bit more helpful when we're utilizing some of the tools in Google Forms. This shuffle question order, I'm going to say don't use it. You're like, oh, yeah, that's the best thing ever. If you're using sections, it only shuffles within a section. So if you're putting one question per section, so the kid has to click next to see the next one, nothing's going to shuffle because there's only one question there. Then the other problem is if you have like a YouTube video and then you want the students to read a couple questions and answer them, it's going to shuffle all of them. So it might have the question first, then the video, and then another question. Or for example, first name, last name, period. If you're collecting that information at the beginning, it's going to shuffle those things. So it might ask for their period, then their last name, then their first name. So I would shy away from this. We're going to talk about the individual question and shuffling those option order. And then this, do not forget about your confirmation message. It always just says your responses have been recorded. Use this to your advantage. Use this to tell the kids, what's going on or what's upcoming. Grab a book, continue reading, whatever it might be. So let them know if this is for something that they're going to be doing at home, maybe during a snow day, whatever, be prepared for, unit 2 tomorrow when we return to class. So use that confirmation into your advantage. You can also put links into the confirmation message. So if you want them to visit a website, however, just be aware that if you are putting a link in there, it is taking them out of Google Form setting and taking them to the link. So they would have to come back to the Google Form if they're going, if they want to go back into Google Classroom. So just be aware of that. And then quizzes, hopefully by this time you have used this for quizzes. The one big thing, especially now with next year, hopefully everything is back to normal. But we might still have a few kids at home or we might have some different scenarios, such as snow days might be remote in the future and things like that. Be careful with the locked mode. If students are not on a school issued Chromebook, the locked mode will not allow them to take the test. So if you have a couple kids that are home, or maybe even a student that was absent and you're like, here, take this at home. If they're just using their personal computer at home, it will give them an error message. So if you turn it on for your students in school and you're like, this is the greatest thing ever, they can't research their answers. If that student at home that was absent was trying to follow along, they're not going to see that quiz. Okay. And again, remember, this is a safe screen. So I am going to stop there for a moment. Do I have any questions? Feel free to unmute or you can type them in the chat, either one. Okay, so let's start looking at some of our questions. So let me get done. Okay, so there's different ways that you can create your forms. One, with your form title, you have an area to type information. So I could put a reading passage there. I can put directions there. Whatever you want, you can include that there. Then I have the ability to add my questions. So if I look at this as a student, so it's going to have the reading passage here. It's going to have, and here's the little trick that shows them that their email is being recorded. But here's my question. And then here is my status bar. So it's showing me how far I can go. So if I want to click, and you'll see here, this is that new thing. So Again, hopefully this will be released to everybody in the fall. So it is saving this. So if I close out of this and come back, my answers will still be there. Okay. So if I continue, you can see that this is my next section. Well, if I put my reading passage here and I go on and I want students to refer back to it, yes, I can add multiple questions here, but I have something that's called titles that allows me to add additional reading passages throughout my different sections. So let's look at that for a minute. So how do we create that? So this is just my title bar and the description underneath it. Next, when we create a section, it automatically comes up untitled section, which is not very helpful, but it does show. So I want you to be aware of that it does show. I can put information here underneath the description. So I can copy and paste it there. Or I have something here that is called titles and description. And that just creates a box for me to add a title. So I could put, reading passage number 2, and then put my reading passage underneath it. So I can add this wherever I want throughout my section. I can add as much text or as little text as I need. Okay. Also remember, when you're creating questions, use a variety of question types. So for example, this one's the checkbox, so I can have multiple answers. This one, it typically, if you have more than 4 responses, I would use the drop down. So the drop down just keeps it a little bit neater. So it looks like there's going to be 4, but when you are viewing this as a student, it does not show all 4. It shows it as the drop down arrow to keep it a little bit cleaner. So I'm sure most of you at some point in time have filled out our PD form for a certificate. Well, we're not going to list all 20 some schools. So that's a drop down arrow for you to select your school district. So it just keeps it a little bit cleaner on your screen. Okay. Okay. So now let's look at the question itself. So we talked about that shuffle questions that was in the settings, but if I'm here and I'm like, well, I don't want the kids being able to peek or see, in each question, I have the ability in my 3 little dots to shuffle the option order. So the questions are going to be in the same order. So, and again, this is a reason why shuffling the questions is not a good idea, because this might come after the question. So it shuffles everything within the section. So if you say, according to the reading passage above, if you had that shuffle question, it might be below. You just don't know. But the shuffle option order is just, it checks it off. So you don't really see anything, but as the students go through it, the order of these 4 options is going to be different for everyone. So that's the difference between the 2. And like I said, now that we are using more of the sections, the shuffle questions doesn't apply as much. Okay, so how do we add a title section? So very simple. I'm just actually just going to add a new form because I'm not going to add to this one. So we know we have our title here. So when I add my title, then I can add my first question if I want. Okay, so Q1. Oops. Okay. If I want another reading passage, if here can be reading passage number 1, but I can add any of these things. The blue bar indicates that it's going to go below that section that you have. So if I want something in between these 2, you can see the blue bar is there. This is my title and description area. So if I click on this, it gives me a whole new box to be able to type in. So this would, of course, be the title. That's bigger font. And then this is the smaller font for a reading passage. Okay. So again, this is different than just adding a section. So adding the section gives you the ability to do this untitled section. Now, notice I haven't typed anything here yet. I want you to see it as a student. So once I click on this, notice it says untitled section. You don't know how many times I've gone to PD trainings, at conferences, things like that, and it still says untitled section. Okay. So just be aware of that, that if you do not remove that, you can still see it. So let's go back. So what are my options? I have two options. I can completely remove it. So if I completely remove it, what the student sees is just a blank bar. Okay. There's nothing there. If I decide to type something in it, you will see that the bar is going to be occupied by words. Now, the reason why I'm showing this, and I'm kind of getting into this, because when we start talking about like choose your own adventures and maybe supplemental information for the students, it's easier when your sections have titles. So now when a student sees this, so here's section 1, and did you guys see how it saved my option there? And then this is the bar that I'm talking about. Okay, so it has it in there. So what did it do for me as the creator of this form? When I am creating a question and I want to go someplace else in my form, go to section based on answer. When I click here, by default, it just goes to the next question. Question 1, 2, 3, 4. But you can see now it's telling me what section it's going to, and then whatever I typed in the title area, it puts it here. So right now, because this is just a generic form, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We're going to get into a choose your own adventure where we have multiple sections, and it's very important that those are labeled so you know where you're going, or your story is not going to flow properly. Okay. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Any questions? I don't see anything in the chat, but I just want to give you guys a second to see if there are any questions so far. And we'll talk more about that. Go to the answer based on the selection here in a few minutes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I apologize if you covered this at the beginning. I had my daughter at an eye doctor appointment that ran late. My hesitation with using Google Forms for quizzes has been that I know it's really easy for kids to cheat. Apparently it was like all over the internet, you know, how to like figure out the code and go in and figure out what the right answer would be. How do we get around that? Like, what my go-to has been Schoology, just because I think it's probably not as easy for them to cheat, or at least I haven't been able to find like the cheating hacks online.
Well, so there's several things. So one, if you just have it open, yeah, kids can have, they can open a Google window and search. That's an option. If you have something such as Go Guardian, or something that's going to limit it, that can prevent some of the cheating. Using the setting to use the locked mode is another way, because they can't have multiple tabs open. They can only have, the quiz open at that point in time. As for, trying to figure out, my guess is some of that has to deal with the data validation, if it's like a fill-in or things like that.
It was like code, like very simple, like coding. Like you go into the code and you
like the
just
source
type in
code for the
something.
page.
Yeah, you just type in something very basic. I don't remember what. And then anything that was like true, false, multiple choice, it would show up. Now, of course, like, the essay questions wouldn't, but
Right.
anything that was, like self-grading would show up.
Let's see. I mean, I would have to pick through this, but my guess is they're coming here somehow and
Yeah,
looking.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
But my guess is they can probably do it in other programs as well. I don't know how clear cut it is for a Google form versus like Schoology. I mean, I would have to compare that. So
Mm-hmm.
it is, let's put it this way. It is not your most robust assessment tool. I mean, if you are using this for a semester exam, I would probably even have you shy away from using it. It's nice that it grades it for you, but it's great for a quiz. It's great for just a quick assessment. It's not necessarily your semester exam tool that you would use, if that makes sense. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing that's nice is if, and I'm not sure what grade you teach, Melissa.
High school.
Okay, so I'm assuming all your kids have Chromebooks, school issued
Correct.
Chromebooks.
Yeah.
Then I
Mm-hmm.
would use that locked mode as much as possible to see if that prevents some of it, because they can't do anything else but be in that screen. I don't even know if they're able to do the source code when they're in locked mode, because
Well,
it pops up as a different
yeah.
tab.
The trouble with that is I also have students who know how to, I haven't been using forms so much, but like with Go Guardian, I kind of gave up on that because half the kids knew how to get around Go Guardian and then to bring their own device, their own laptop to school.
Oh,
So, I mean, I know at some point you just have to let go. If they're going to cheat, they're going
right.
to cheat. But, I don't
You
know.
almost
It's
need
just,
to give them an A for effort for the amount of time and energy they put into trying to get around the system than just taking the
I
2 minutes that
know.
it takes to complete the assessment.
Right.
So I'll have to look into that a little bit more with the source code and kind of read through that. That's not a quick reading, as you could see. So I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
think
if
it
it,
was on BuzzFeed. I think that's where
okay.
it started spreading to all the students.
Okay. I'll check it out to see if it actually says, like, that Rover's the correct answer, whatever. So I'll look into that a little bit more and see if I can find some information for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Anything else before I move on? Okay. Let's look at our sections first before we start looking at images. So one of the nice things when we're working with sections is you have the ability to do a few things with them. So we know we can move our questions around. So if I want to move my questions back and forth, I can move my questions. But you also have the ability to do some things with your sections. So for example, if you want to have 5 sections, each have 2 to 3 questions with a reading passage, you can set one of the sections up and then duplicate it. So then it knows, hey, let's create the next section. So we have, whatever it might say, videos, it's going to say video 1, but then we're going to have to go into each of those sections, video 2, video 3, and so forth. So we're not retyping the words all the time. We're just retyping the numbers. You can move a section. So I can move this. So where do I want to move this to? I can move the whole section all the way up to the top. So, and when I say I'm moving a section, it moves everything with it. So I can take this and move it to the top. And now it's going to be my first section. Okay, so see how that changed? So it makes a big difference instead of trying to move each of your questions individually. Now it's allowing you to move multiple things at once. And sorry, I got to get that back in order. Okay, so be aware of that. It also allows you to merge it with the section above. So if I am like, you know what, I separated these, they shouldn't be separated. I need to combine them. So instead of trying to combine or take all my questions and move them one at a time up to the section above, I can say merge with above, and it's going to merge it with this section. So then these questions become part of section 3. So I can duplicate. So it's going to duplicate anything that it says here. And I can then create my multiple sections. The difference between duplicating and creating a new section, creating the new section is just going to create the new section. If I hit my duplicate, you'll see that it's going to take everything that's there. So if I'm setting it up with a reading passage or a video or whatever, that stuff is going to be consistent. Okay. And you can delete a whole section. So it's going to delete that and all the questions with it. So notice it says if you wanted to preserve your questions, you have to move it up. If not, it's going to delete everything, which that's what I wanted it to do. Okay. So different things that you can use with that. Also be aware, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the choose your own adventure, but you can also, so maybe if a student is going through this when they're done, maybe you just want them to be able to submit the form, or maybe you want them to go from section 1 to the video. Why you wouldn't have it in order, I don't know, but you can change the section of where it's going to continue on to. So this would be used more for supplemental material if you want them to go to videos to watch after multiple questions, or maybe you just have a video that you want them to watch after answering questions before they actually submit. So you can have them watch those videos and then move on to the submit area. So just be aware that there's different things that you can do with those sections, whether you're with the section as itself or at the end of a section where you want it to go. And then we'll talk about the individual questions, where individual questions can go based on the responses. Okay, so let's look at, before we start going, because that gets a little tricky. So before we start going there, let's look at our options for adding images. So our pictures, how we want our students to see the question. So there's 3 different ways that you can add images. So the first way, let me find my page first. The first way is just adding an individual image. This is not tied to any question. So it's just a free box. It's independent of everything. So again, that's why I bring up, if you shuffle that question order, it's going to take this individual image and move it around your section. So it might not be above the questions that you want it to be with. So how do we add just an image? That's the easy one. So that's this add image over here on the side. So everybody typically finds this one, no problem. Add image. You can upload one from your computer. You can search Google Photos. You can just do a Google image search. Okay, so if I do a life cycle of a frog, so we'll get that in here. And then I'm going to insert it. And you'll notice that it's just an individual image. There's no question with it, anything. I can do a little bit of modification to it, not much. I can just usually shrink it. I can add a title to it. So I could just put life cycle. Okay, but again, notice there's no questions. If I add a question, it becomes independent of the image. Okay, so our next way that we can add an image is with the question. So the question gets stated first, and then the image, and then the responses. So how does that look different than what we just did? So this time I can say, what is to life cycle? Okay. Now right here, I have the insert image, and you'll notice that it'll go below my question. So let's get that same image. And then when it comes in, you'll see it's below my question. So of course, I'd want to shrink it a little bit. Okay. And then I can put my options here. Okay. My third way that I can add images is by using them within my options. So you can see which one is a right angle, and I have different angles here for them to be able to visualize. So with that being said, each of my options has the ability to add an image. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to find an image of this. Let's do clipart. We'll put in a cute little tadpole. Okay. And then you'll notice the image comes. The images do come usually smaller. So when it's the options. Now, here's one thing. You either have to have it say option 1 or you have to type something in there. Doing a space does not just blank it out. You can put a period, but it has to be at least one character. So you can either just leave it as option 1 or type in if you want to, put egg, tadpole, frog, whatever it might be. And then I can continue, same thing. I'm going to have the same option here. So I can add my little frog. And you'll see it'll bring it in about the same size as option 1. So when we're looking at this, here's the difference between the 3 images. This is my independent picture. Here is my question with my image. And then because of the size of my images, you can see how it does option 1, option 2. And if I had 2 more, it would be kind of in a square. But students can click on the image itself, or they can click in the radio button. So either way. Okay, so those are your options for images. Any questions with those? Okay, last thing I want to show you, and then we're going to start our choose your own adventure and supplemental option. There is something called data validation. Okay, so you can do this for checkbox questions. You can also do this with text. So what does data validation mean? It means that it is looking for some type of requirement to happen in order for the students to continue on with the form. So for example, with my checkboxes, if I click on my 3 little dots, I have the ability to say response validation. So what that is saying is, okay, the students have to select at least, at most, or exactly how many boxes. So think about this, and if you've been through the tutorial of the state exam, it will say you have to select 2. Now, can the students select 1 and move on? Yes, they can. Do you want that same option here, or do you want to require them to select 2? So if I say select exactly, I can put in a number here. Okay. This custom text, I can say, please select 2 options before continuing. Okay. So then this is what's going to pop up if they only select 1. So let's look at that real quick. Oh, and I did this on the wrong one. Sorry. So if I only select 1 here, notice whatever I put in that custom text field shows up right there. So it's going to highlight it in red until I show it another one. If I decide to uncheck one, it's going to pop up again. Okay. So that is an option for you, especially if you're working with special ed students. maybe you want to help them. So maybe you're a intervention specialist and you're modifying the teacher's exam. Maybe the gen ed kids don't need this, but you want this for your students to know, hey, 2 of these are nouns. Let's look at this closely so that we can see we need to select 2 of these options. Okay. So that works for the check boxes. Now, what about a text field? So whether it's paragraph, for paragraph text, short answer is a little bit different. You can still do it with short answer. It's just less options. So my response validation, you can see, okay, what do you want? Did you tell them they have to type 100 characters or, 500 characters, whatever it might be. Now it can't be you can't say type 5 sentences in the paragraph and, in paragraph form below. It doesn't know how to count sentences. Okay, so just be aware of that. So you can see I can put in the length, I can have a maximum character count or minimum character count. Now, can I say, because I know a lot of you have standards-based report cards, I wish I could do this for you guys in the comments area. The only thing that I could do is put the suggested maximum on there, and sometimes it still goes over. But this would be the case where I could say, okay, the max count can only be 250 characters. At 250, it would not allow you to type anymore. Okay. Oh, I have a space there. Okay. And then again, you can put in customized text. So if you want to say, whatever, please make sure you do not type more than 250 characters. It would pop up just like the other one with the red box around it. So again, that is called response validation, or you'll see sometimes with like short answer, it'll be data validation. So same concept, you're able to pick some type of requirement for that question type. Okay. Any questions with that? Has anybody used it before? You can just give me a thumbs up in the chat. Looking pretty quiet out there. Okay, gotta know. So yeah, so it's there, it's an option. So I do know some teachers use this for like passwords in order to get into the quiz. So they have to type in the correct password in order to continue on to the next question, which is kind of a cool concept. Or if you're doing some type of like scavenger hunt, they have to have the correct answer in order for it to allow you to move on to the next section. So different things that you can use it for besides just like character count and so forth. So okay, let's look at a choose your own adventure. So I am going to put this into the chat. I'm going to have you guys go through this first one time. So I'm going to allow you guys to kind of pick your own adventure. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to go through to see how you can, what you can pick, and then how you'll have different endings. And then we're going to come back together in just a couple minutes, and I'm going to ask you what direction you've gone, so that we can talk about the different things, and we'll compare with the group that we have what they did on their Home Alone Choose Your Own Adventure. So here is the link to the form. Go ahead and click on that, and you guys can go through. It's very short. I think there's only like 2 or 3 selections. I'm going to pause the recording for a second too.
Shelley, it's saying that we need permission.
You probably do. Refresh, try it again. Sorry about that. I unchecked collect email address, but forgot to uncheck the restrict to TCCSA. You should be able to be in with a personal Gmail account because I'm not collecting email addresses.
It's working for me now. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, it looks like a lot of you are getting those turned in. So let me resume. Okay, so as you guys are responding, I'm seeing that you guys are turning things in. I don't even know how many, we have 13, so 13 people have participated. Some of you might have gone through twice. So does anybody want to tell me, did anybody choose to answer the doorbell? You can unmute or put in, but I want to see what ending you came up with. Nobody picked, everybody's being good and everybody listened to your mom. I cannot believe that. Okay, then if everybody listened to mom and did not answer the door, what present did you get? Or what happened at your ending? Okay. So yes, so we got presents from grandma. So let's break this down and let's see what's happening here. So there are all kinds of templates out there too. If you type in Google Forms, choose your own adventure templates, there are PDFs, there's Word documents, there's Google documents, there's Google drawings of it. So it's your preference of how you want to set up your template. But I would strongly suggest your first time through, I prefer Post-it notes, but that's just me. But you want to set up your choices. So in this case, I have you either answer the doorbell or you listen to mom and you do not answer. Okay. So I have those two things as my Post-it notes on the top. Now, if I answer the doorbell, I need two things to happen. So what two things are going to happen? So that's where I am labeling my sections. So I know what I am selecting as I go. That's why I said earlier, it's very important that you have these sections labeled so you know, say section 2 is that I answered the door. So you can see section 2 is just text. There's no question there. It's automatically going to go to the next section where I see that outside I have a package. And then these are my two choices. So again, like for me, 2 more Post-it notes. I can leave the package or I can bring it inside. And then again, I am labeling my sections. Okay. And then here it is. Okay. And then what was my other one? You bring it inside. Okay, so I bring it inside, and then this is where it says, mom was disappointed in you. Okay, so that was my last one. So now I have to take my two options for you listen to mom, which it seems like all of you guys did. So then I have those options. So I did not answer. So again, I'm labeling things so that I know when I'm creating this, what to look for. So again, there's just some text and then the question. So, and then there's my two responses. So you see that it's a package from grandma. Do you open it right away or do you wait until your birthday? So again, I can open it right away or I can wait. Okay. So again, when we are creating this, this is the important thing. So first of all, how did I get that turned on? So that is when you are modifying any of your questions. If you click on it, if I go to my three little dots, it is called go to section based on answer. So that turns this ability on. So I'm going to go back to my blank one so you guys can see this. So if oops, wrong one here. So if I click on this and I say, go to section based on answer, you're going to see drop downs pop up. So now I can see, go to the next section, go to section 1, which says title here, or go to section 2, which is here is my new section. So again, it's picking up these things. So it's very helpful to label those. So then these will stay open. So again, you can type in all of your questions. So my direction is to go one route at a time. So everything I did was for you answered the doorbell. So I had that, I had extra story, I had additional questions, and I went all the way through the end of that storyline. Then I went back through and started this one. So you notice that this one jumps all the way to section 6. So all the way down here, this is where my next section starts. And then if I look at these, and they're close together, section 7 is you open it right away or you wait. But again, adding those little descriptions in the sections really help. So this one had, if you just, again, if Google, no, I did choose your own adventure. Yeah. So this one had a lot of different ideas on here. So you can see here, she's got some templates. So if I make a copy of that, so you can see, and like I said, I like to use Post-it notes because I can move them around. But then instead of saying, page 1, page 2, you're using sections. So this is going to go from, section 1 to section 2. Okay. And they started off, with 2 options. So then that you can go to section 3, or section 2 can go to 3 and 4, however you want to set it up. But like I said, there are so many options out there. This website has Word document, it has a PDF. So if you want to do this with your kids, those are both available here as well. So again, I just Googled choose your own adventure. I did this probably, oh gosh, it was probably 2009, because it was before they moved me from integration to the high school. So I would say 2009, and we used Post-it notes, and the kids loved it because they would move stuff around and they're like, nope, I want this answer with this one. Or, they had different Post-it note colors, and it was a fun activity for them. There were not all these options back then. Google wasn't even around. We did it in PowerPoint. So, back then it was, something that we were working on it with a PowerPoint project. So there's resources available, different things depending on the age of your kids as well. So, but again, labeling your sections is very helpful. And then each section that you go to, you have to turn on that go to section based on answer. So that's a fun activity. So that might be for a language arts class. I actually did this with high school students, and we actually worked with a classroom of elementary students. So the students actually got to go over to the elementary school one day, and they were able to peer read with a student, and the student was able to go through a couple of the different adventures. So it was a very fun activity. It brought the older kids and the younger kids together. But younger kids can create these the same. So your other option for working with the section based on your answer is supplemental work. So if your students are working on things and you're noticing that they're just not getting the answer, or maybe you want them to answer 4 or 5 questions. By the 5th question, they should understand it. On the 5th question, if they get it wrong, instead of going to the next section or even submitting, it might allow, you can also submit. Okay. They are now going to go to a supplemental section. So in this supplemental section, which is called, it's my section 3. So you can see here, section 3, it's going to review the problem. So it's going to have a short little video and then maybe 1 or 2 questions again. Now, if a student does not answer it incorrectly, they might just go on to the next question. And then if they answer that one correctly, they can submit the form. Now, I will tell you, this is trickier than the choose your own adventure, because it's, if they miss one question, are you having them go review? Are they, and it's not smart enough to say, hey, I got 4 out of 5 correct, so they don't need to go to the supplemental. But if they get 3 out of 5, then I want them to go and review the video. It's not smart enough. You have to pick what question you're going to bounce them to the review section and what question they're going to be able to submit. Okay. I had somebody during my training on Monday. She started off with way too many questions. She had well over 10 questions. And when you're thinking 10, you're like, well, that's not a lot. But if you're trying to do something like this, it is. Start off small. Start off with just a couple questions. And like I said, have 2 or 3 questions. If they answer them correctly by the 3rd question, then they have the ability to submit. If they answer it wrong, then they're going to go to the review problem. Okay. And in this case, it's the next section. But I could, if I wanted to, say go to section 3. Okay. Any questions with the choose your own adventure or supplemental? So again, it's all based on storyboarding and making sure you have things labeled. And actually, since we're out of time, I was looking at my kitchen clock, which the battery must be dying. I'll take any questions. If you guys have any questions for anything, please feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. I'm going to stop my screen share